All right, guys, so we got some updates out of Israel and Gaza as it looks like Israel is moving forward with not only a continued widespread bombing campaign that has so far killed hundreds and hundreds of people, but also stepping up a potential renewed ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. And obviously, this is coming just days after Israel fully disintegrated whatever shreds remained of the Gaza ceasefire that was implemented in mid-January. So here from Middle East Eye on the latest, their headline is Israel launches new ground invasion of northern Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas is firing rockets towards Tel Aviv for the first time since the war renewed. So they start off here saying that the Israeli army launched a fresh ground invasion of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip on Thursday while hitting various areas of the enclave with airstrikes. They say that medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 110 Palestinians have been killed since dawn this morning, bringing the death toll since Israel ended the ceasefire on Tuesday to more than 500. They also say that Israel said that it would no longer allow Palestinians to enter northern Gaza from the south, ordering residents to get away from the Salahuddin road that runs down the enclave and to use the coastal road instead. And again, after not retaliating against Israel's attacks in the past 2 days, Hamas has now fired rockets towards Tel Aviv. Now, we actually have a further update on the death toll reported out of Gaza right now. According here to Omar Badr, it's now up to 710 people that have been killed and 900 wounded in Gaza in just the last 48 hours, making this one of the deadliest few stretches of days since the genocide began back in October of 2023. Now, we also have a map here to put into perspective what exactly Israel is doing right now. As pointed out here by Mohammed Shahada, he says that Israeli forces just began reoccupying the Netzarim corridor in Gaza, which you can see here towards the northern portion of the Gaza Strip, dissecting it into two halves. They say that Israel has now fully violated every clause of the ceasefire agreement's phase 1, and they're now re-implementing what is called the Five Fingers policy of dividing Gaza into concentration camps. And you can see the 5 sections here with Rafah down in the south, and then Khan Yunis down here, and then Deir al-Balah in the center of the Gaza Strip, and then Gaza City up here to the north, and then also Jabalia even further north here. And the red bits down the center here is basically where they're doing these dividing corridors and separating Gaza into multiple different concentration camps, where again, they are now, it looks like, pushing into the north with this ground invasion, as well as continuing to bomb the entirety of the Gaza Strip. And keep in mind, this is coming obviously after months and months and months, over a year and a half now, of this genocide, where Israel has been bombing mosques and schools and churches and UN buildings and refugee camps and aid organizations and journalists, civilians, over and over and over again. Basically, a huge chunk, a majority of the buildings in Gaza have been obliterated. There's almost nothing left to bomb at this point. You've had the vast majority of the population that is starving, a vast majority of the population that has been displaced and have nowhere to go. You have people up in the north that were only just recently able to return there that are literally living in tents on top of the rubble of their former homes. And this is the time where Israel says, yeah, we need to continue bombing and we need to continue with a ground invasion of Gaza. And also, obviously comes with a background of some statements that we've gotten from Israeli officials and the Trump administration on their plans for full-blown ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Now, to follow up on that, we had this recent statement that just came out over the last day from Israel's Defense Minister Katz, who said this, and this is a quote from him. He gave this speech directly to camera, saying, "Residents of Gaza, this is your final warning. The first Sinwar destroyed Gaza, and the second Sinwar will bring upon it total ruin. The Israeli Air Force's attack against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What follows will be far harsher, and you will bear the full cost." So, notice he says, the Israeli Air Force's attacks against Hamas terrorists. What we've seen so far, the videos that I'm seeing pop up on my feed are a vast majority women and children, right? We're talking about them attacking indiscriminately within Gaza innocent civilians for the most part. Now, he's classifying this as those have been attacks against Hamas militants, Hamas terrorists in his own words, and he's saying what we're about to do is even worse than what we've been doing so far. right? To give you a sense of what we're talking about here, we're talking about a full-blown genocide of the Palestinian population, coming with the backdrop of Israel also completely cutting off all humanitarian aid and electricity from the Gaza Strip, where we have reports like I covered yesterday in my video, or 2 days ago in my video, of an Australian medic who's working inside of Gaza talking about how they are so depleted, they have such little resources, and the bombing has been so horrific that you have innocent children in the dozens who are having to get medical procedures, some of which are amputations without any anesthetic. So it's as horrific a situation as you could possibly imagine right now. But here we have the Israeli Defense Minister saying it's going to get worse, okay? He continues though, and it somehow gets even more barbaric from here. He says evacuation of the population from combat zones will soon resume. Now, by combat zones, he means the entirety of the Gaza Strip. That's what he actually means by that. He says if all Israeli hostages are not released and Hamas is not kicked out of Gaza, Israel will act with force you have not known before. He says take the advice of the US President Trump, return the hostages and kick out Hamas, and new options will open up for you, including relocation to other parts of the world for those who choose. The alternative is destruction and total devastation. So you understand what he's saying here? He's saying in the best possible situation, what we are offering the people of Gaza, innocent civilians, that's who he's addressing here, right? He's not addressing Hamas because he's saying kick Hamas out, meaning he's talking to a different party here, namely the civilian population in Gaza. And he's saying the best opportunity for you is to kick Hamas out, right? To return the hostages. And then if you're lucky after that, we will relocate you, or in other words, ethnically cleanse you to other parts of the world. So basically, the options that are on the table here for Palestinian civilians in Gaza is either full ethnic cleansing or full genocide, or in his words, total devastation and destruction. This is in the words of the Israeli defense minister here, openly saying this. There is no option for peace. From the perspective of Israel, there is no option for a ceasefire, which gives you an indication in terms of how serious they were during this ceasefire that was signed back in January. Of course, we knew at the time that they were never going to follow through on this, right? Israel was never going to pull out from Gaza and institute some sort of a long-term plan for peace and coexistence with Palestinian people. That was never their goal. The goal was to make life in Gaza impossible, to do a full ethnic cleansing, and then to absorb the territory. Now they're just openly saying that. Right? He's saying best case scenario for you, civilians of Gaza, is that you are expelled to a different part of the world. That's the best case scenario, according to Israel. And of course, they're touting the Trump endorsement of this plan, which, isn't inaccurate because we've seen Trump openly talk about how he wants the US to own Gaza and that the rest of the population will be moved around the world, never to return. Now, we also have here, as pointed out by Masab Abu Toa, who says that there are new flyers who dropped inside of Gaza. In it is what follows. So this is the text from this flyer that was reportedly dropped inside of Gaza. It says, to the people of Gaza, after what happened and the end of the temporary ceasefire, and before we start Trump's compulsory plan, which we will proceed with whether you like it or not, this is the last call for anyone who may share information with us in return for financial support. Reconsider this. The world map will not change if Gaza's people disappear. No one will notice you. No one will ask about you. Neither America nor Europe cares about Gaza, even the Arab states. They are our allies. They provide us with money, oil, and arms. They only send you shrouds. The game will end soon. So, listen, guys, you look at shit like this. Is there any mistaking what exactly Israel's goal is here, other than the complete and total annihilation of the Palestinian people? By the way, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank as well, where they have set records for the illegal expansion of Israeli settlements into Palestinian territory, where there are records being set in terms of the violence, the killing, the arrests of Palestinians in the West Bank, where they are terrorized on a daily basis, both by Israeli so-called security forces as well as by Israeli settlers who are backed by the same Israeli occupation forces. There is no mistaking what the plan is here. This is all happening in front of the entire world. It's not difficult to figure out. If I can figure this out as a fucking 25-year-old sitting in my room here, then the rest of the world can figure this shit out, right? It's not difficult. So, there comes a time where it's like, obviously the U.S. is fully and totally complicit in this, as well as many other, especially European countries around the world. But it's like, are we going to allow this to happen? Is this where we're at right now as a global society, where there can be a full-blown genocide and ethnic cleansing that they are proudly announcing to the world, and nobody's going to step up to do anything about it? We are just going to allow them to announce this publicly and do nothing about it other than continue to send them weapons, continue to fund them, continue to give them cover on the international stage. This is how little we value human life, that they can proudly say this shit in the open with no consequences whatsoever. Now, we continue here. From Ryan Grimm, he has a video here from Dropsite where he says Hamas official says that they were on the cusp of a breakthrough agreement, which explains the timing of Netanyahu's renewed violence. Now, we're going to watch a little bit of this interview here from Al Jazeera with Dr. Bassem Naim, a member of Hamas's political bureau, who reveals that Hamas had been close to securing a ceasefire deal just before Israel launched a new offensive in Gaza. Now, it's also important to keep in mind the context of Benjamin Netanyahu's personal stakes that are at play right now. He is obviously, and this is not just my opinion, this is also the opinion of many Israelis who have family members who were part of those who were taken hostage inside of Gaza. It's also the position of a huge chunk of Israeli society as well, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu is putting his own personal career ambitions ahead of getting any hostages back, or ahead of getting some sort of a peace plan put in place. Part of the reason for that is that I believe it was either the day of or the next day or the day before, his corruption trial was set to begin. And what do you know, somehow by coincidence, he renews this genocide in Gaza to then make the excuse of, oh, we're at war, I can't possibly show up for my corruption trial, right? Somehow that happens on the same day, corresponding, right? That must just be a coincidence that he gets to dodge his corruption trial as a result of this renewed offensive inside of Gaza, right? And there are also widespread protests that are taking place across Israel in favor of a ceasefire. There are also, the calculations from Benjamin Netanyahu's position where if he renews this genocide, then maybe he can bring people back to his coalition, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, this far-right fascist sociopath from Israel. And if he can bring him back to his coalition, then maybe he gets to stay in power a little bit longer. There's a whole bunch of personal political calculation that goes into what Benjamin Netanyahu is deciding to do right now. And so anyways, this interview comes within the context of all of that.
All right, let's bring in Bassem Naim, a member of Hamas's political bureau. Sir, you're joining us on Zoom. Thanks for joining us in the news hour. Can you give us a sense of where the ceasefire negotiations stand right now?
Thank you very much. We have received a few days before the last brutal aggression against our people in the Gaza Strip, a new American proposal from Mr. Witkoff through the mediators, talking about a bridging proposal to release some prisoners in exchange for returning back to the conditions of the first phase, which means temporary ceasefire, opening the borders, allowing the humanitarian aid to get in, and the second, to engage in the negotiations of the second phase. We were up to the last hour before the aggression, we were engaged in these negotiations, and we were near to make a breakthrough in that case. Unfortunately, Netanyahu, for his internal political calculations to get the right radical groups behind him, supporting him in the budget affair, he decided to go the other way to launch the war against Gazans. Now, during the last 2 days, despite of this brutal aggression, the contacts with the mediators and through them with the Americans continue to.
Sir, you said you were on the cusp of a breakthrough in these talks.
To reach a final proposal, and I think to reach a final proposal, I think we have done good steps forward towards reaching this proposal.
You've told us that you were on the cusp of a breakthrough in these ceasefire talks. What could that breakthrough have looked like?
So you understand what he's saying here, guys. Take him at his word or don't take him at his word. But his claim here is that they were on the cusp of, even within the context of Israel since January, violating the ceasefire dozens and dozens and dozens of times, continuing to kill Palestinians, refusing to engage in negotiations for phase 2, refusing any sort of prospects of them pulling out from Gaza, et cetera, even though they had already violated the deal in a myriad of different ways. And they had put this new proposal onto Hamas and made all of these new demands. You still have a Hamas political bureau member here who's saying, even then, we were still on the cusp of potentially reaching a short-term deal to extend out phase 1 and then to move forward with negotiations in phase 2. Even with all of that context, he's saying we were still on the cusp of potentially working something out. And then in comes Benjamin Netanyahu with all of these personal calculations of the budget crisis and protests against him, and trying to bring members back into his coalition, and his corruption trial and investigations into his wife reportedly, all of these different things. And Netanyahu says, no, we're not going to work towards a deal, right? We are going to move forward with a continued genocide. That's what we're going to do. So again, interesting there. Now, at the same time, we also have the broader prospects of what we've been warning about for a very long time now, which is a potential U.S. war with Iran. Now, if we had to come to the brink of something like this, Donald Trump is probably the last person on earth that I would want to be leading the charge, given his history of pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal that Iran was following in accordance with, that was signed obviously under the Obama administration, then he ripped to shreds. The guy who assassinated Qasem Soleimani in a drastic escalation with Iran, the guy who basically takes a full-blown maximalist approach to Iran with sanctions and the rest of that. This guy is not the kind of guy who I think could walk us off the ledge of a potential war with Iran, which needless to say would be absolutely catastrophic, not just for Iran, but also for the United States and the entire region as well. And so we have this reporting from Axios that the U.S. and Israel are to hold high-level Iran consultations next week. Now, the reason, again, why this is alarming is that Israel wants us to go to war with Iran. Right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They've been wanting us to go to war with Iran for a very long time, for years now at this point. And this is also coming as we're getting reporting from Ken Klippenstein. Highly recommend that you guys go and sign up for his Substack here. But he has two different reports that I'll link down below. One is the Iran war plan. Pentagon gears up for a major war with Iran. And in terms of what this war could potentially look like, he also just recently, yesterday, published this piece, which is titled The Nuclear War Plan for Iran. Trump's threats to Tehran are alarming, and he describes what exactly they mean in this piece. Again, both of those will be linked down below if you want to go read the entirety of them. But again, basically we have a Donald Trump who has been repeatedly threatening Iran with war, who has been, pushing us with this brinksmanship and flying B-52 bombers in and around the area of Iran that are nuclear capable, aircraft. And he's basically threatening Iran that if you don't, within the next couple of weeks, sign a deal, what exactly is that deal other than, I don't know, Iran completely folds and does whatever Trump's bidding is? I don't know. But if you don't agree to an Iran nuclear deal 2.0 with my name on it within the next couple of weeks, then we, the United States, are going to move forward with option B, which again is war with Iran. Now, all indications from Iran so far are basically like, we don't really have any interest in doing a deal with a guy who ripped up the previous deal that we had already agreed to and were following in accordance with. Right? Which from Iran's perspective, like, that's kind of reasonable, right? Why the fuck are you going to do a deal with a guy who ripped up the previous deal for no goddamn reason and then proceeded to assassinate one of your top generals, right? But now Trump is basically saying, sign a deal with us in the next couple of weeks, or potentially we're going to go to war. And what is that war going to look like? Well, red flags popping up that the U.S. and Israel could potentially be thinking about a nuclear option. So there's your updates for right now, guys. Israel continuing with not only a bombing campaign inside of the Gaza Strip, but also a renewed, it looks like, ground invasion as well. We have hundreds and hundreds of people that are being killed at a record pace right now in one of the deadliest couple of days since the genocide began. And in the meantime, we have Trump, again, bringing us closer and closer towards an absolutely catastrophic war with Iran.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me. No one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying